Europe, 1943. Amidst the roar of engines and the smell of gunfire, the world was descending into the darkest phase of World War II. Nazi Germany still dominated much of the continent, but from the west, the silver birds with white stars of the United States Air Force began to appear. More and more boldly, in the cold of a German winter, on the outskirts of Augsburg, Erich Müller, a 32-year-old aeronautical engineer, crouched under the dim lights of the Messerschmitt Werke factory. He was not a soldier, he did not hold a gun, but every drawing, every sheet of steel he designed could decide the lives of thousands of people out there. For Erich, war was about numbers, about aerodynamic curves, about the promise to the Reich that the Germans would always make something better, faster, stronger. At the same time, at Debden Air Base, England, a wet, cold place, P-51 Mustang pilot Lieutenant Jack Turner was inspecting the silver wings of his plane, newly painted with the horse's head. He was young, only 24, but he had already flown dozens of bomber escort missions over the Ruhr and Hamburg. Jack knew nothing about Erich, nor did he know that somewhere across the Rhine, a man was designing the very plane that would kill him. That was war. Two talented men with the same passion for the skies, but placed on opposite sides of the gunfire. After the early years of Blitzkrieg, the German Empire seemed invincible, but by 1943, the tide had begun to turn. From North Africa to Italy to the skies above Berlin, American B-17 flying fortresses roared in, bombing every German factory, every railway, every war factory, and every time the siren sounded, Germans ran to their shelters. High above, Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s raced, chasing the American bombers amid black clouds that rolled like smoke from hell. Erich knew, if he didn't create something new, Germany would lose its air superiority. As for Jack, every time he flew over the Ruhr, he saw the black smoke rising from the burning cities, and he knew each bomb that fell could shatter the dreams of people like Erich. In May 1943, the Luftwaffe issued an urgent directive. We need a new fighter, faster, more powerful, able to defeat the American P-47 and P-51 escort formations. Erich was summoned to Berlin. In a room filled with cigarettes and maps, among SS officers and chief engineers, he heard a name mentioned: the Me-262, the world's first jet aircraft. It would fly faster than anything the Americans had ever seen. But Erich knew the project was more than just engineering. It was a gamble. Jet engines were too new, fuel was scarce, and Hitler wanted everything turned into a jet bomber, a crazy idea that every engineer was biting his teeth into. Meanwhile, Jack Turner and his squadron were being equipped with a new American weapon, the P-51 Mustang, which had long range, high speed, and the ability to escort bombers all the way to Berlin. The Americans had figured out the key, not just to attack, but to attack the heart of Germany. On August 17, 1943, the skies over Regensburg were ablaze. More than 300 B-17s flew over, escorted by P-47 Thunderbolts, attacking the Messerschmitt factory. The explosions were deafening. Erich was in the factory when the ground shook. The window shattered. He looked up and saw black smoke filling the sky. His factory. Jack, from above, saw the bomb hit its target, but his heart was empty. No one knew that in that factory there were people like Erich trying to stay alive. That evening, Erich walked through the rubble. Dozens of workers lay motionless under the steel and rubble. He looked up at the night sky, where several B-17s were still burning and falling, and exclaimed, "Their victory or our defeat. What difference does it make if they all lose their humanity?" While at Debden, Jack wrote to his mother, "I don't know if I'm doing right or wrong. All I know is that as long as I fly, I have to survive. And if someone on the ground is looking up, I hope they understand I'm just doing my job. War is more than guns and bullets. It's a race of technology that a clash of ideals and survival." 1944 was approaching, and both sides knew the decisive battle would take place in the skies. Erich began to devote all his energy to perfecting the Me-262, believing it would be the wonder weapon that would save Germany. As for Jack, he was ordered to transfer to the P-51D Squadron, the most powerful aircraft the US had ever had. Two men, two destinies, preparing to fly to the same sky, where there was no room for error, and only speed, skill, and faith would determine who would survive. February 1944, over the skies of southern Germany, the air was thick with the smell of gasoline and burning iron. Waves of American B-17 Flying Fortress bombers were crossing the border, heading straight for Augsburg, once the main center of Nazi Germany's fighter production. Underground, In a deep underground bunker, Erich Müller and his team of engineers were pouring all their efforts into the Me-262, a jet aircraft the world had never seen before. It was the last hope of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. The Jumo 004 jet engine, the heart of this beast, was being tested for the 10th time, and as always, it exploded. Erich pounded his fist on the steel table, breathing heavily. If we don't finish it before the Americans reach Berlin, it's all over. Outside, the sirens blared. Achtung, Feindflug, Feindflug, the air raid warning. Augsburg was about to be attacked. The sky shook as more than 700 B-17s took off from their base in England. Escorting them was the 357th Mustang Squadron, led by Lieutenant Jack Turner. Jack sat in the cockpit, the Merlin engines roaring like a heartbeat. He remembered what the colonel had said before takeoff. "We're not just dropping bombs, we're taking Germany's wings off." Jack looked out into the distance, where the morning sun reflected off the cockpit windows of hundreds of B-17s, hulking hunks of steel hurtling toward death. Beneath him lay Germany, a land he had only known from maps and names. Augsburg, Munich, Stuttgart. Today they were no longer dots on paper, but targets. As the clock struck 10 a.m., black dots appeared on the horizon. They were German Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, racing up at deadly speed. The air was instantly hellish. 20mm bullets tore apart the escort formation. A P-51 to Jack's right burst into flames, the pilot bailing out, but before it opened, it disappeared in a fiery orange haze. Jack tightened his grip on the controls, reversed his wings, and fired a long burst of bullets at a diving Bf-109. The bullet pierced the fuselage of his opponent, and the German plane broke in two, falling like a piece of burning steel. But Jack had no time to celebrate, because in the distance, black smoke was rising from Augsburg. The first bombs had fallen. Erich rushed out of the shelter, accompanied by the wailing of sirens and the pounding of bombs. The sky was red. A factory was burning, its steel frame melting like wax. Workers, engineers, soldiers, all were running in all directions. Amid the smoke and dust, he saw the wreckage of the destroyed Me-262 prototypes, the unborn children of German science. Erich knelt down, trembling, holding the charred wing. "We don't have time," he whispered. When the smoke cleared, only a small factory to the south remained undamaged. Erich gathered the surviving team and announced, "We will start again from the ashes. The Me-262 will take off just once." July 1944. After hundreds of sleepless nights, Erich and his team of engineers finally got the Me-262 working properly. On its first test flight, the sound of the jet engine was like the wind tearing through the sky. The speed reached 870 km weight, twice as fast as any American fighter plane. The news spread quickly throughout Berlin. The Luftwaffe generals were amazed. Hitler was excited, but Erich was worried. He understood Germany was too exhausted. Even with superior weapons, would there be enough fuel, enough pilots to fight? However, he still believed in the idea. If the Me-262 went into battle, at least they would make the enemy wary. July 28, 1944. Munich. Jack's squadron was escorting a convoy of B-17s into the German industrial heartland. Everything was going as usual, until the radar picked up a strange signal. From the southwest, a silver object flashed, coming so fast that no one had time to react. "Oh my God, it's going twice as fast as us," Jack shouted over the radio. A Mustang was cut in half in an instant. Shells from the Me-262's 30mm cannon tore apart the American formation. On the ground, Erich stood in the observation tower, watching the flight of his first jet. It spun, shot past, and then disappeared like the wind. No one in the sky could believe their eyes. Something new, far beyond any known rules of combat. Jack returned to base, his face dark. "I have never seen anything so fast. It appears and disappears like a ghost." Meanwhile, Erich wrote in his diary, "Today, the Me-262 flew, and it made the Americans bow their heads. But I am not happy, because I know on the other side they are also human beings like us." In Washington, D.C., the U.S. Air Force Command held an emergency meeting. The report showed that Germany had operational jet aircraft. General Karl Spaatz growled, "If we cannot stop this monster, our entire air campaign will be in vain." Immediately, the U.S. intensified its attacks on the Me-262 factories. Thousands of sorties duties were carried out, focusing on Regensburg, Lechfeld, Augsburg, where Eric was working. The technological war entered a frenzy. The Americans wanted to extinguish the German fire before it burned. The Germans tried to keep it alive day by day, hour by hour. One night in August, Eric stood alone in the dark workshop, looking at the half-painted Me-262. He quietly touched the cold metal. Maybe tomorrow it will no longer be there, but at least it flew. Meanwhile, Jack sat in front of the photo of his fallen comrade, writing in his diary, "We call it victory, but I am beginning to understand that war has no winners, only survivors." Both men, an engineer and a pilot, had no idea that fate was bringing them closer together than ever. One side created a weapon of mass destruction. The other side piloted the machine that destroyed the enemy. In December 1944, the Germans launched the Ardennes campaign, a desperate counteroffensive. In the snowy sky, the Me-262s began to take to the battlefield en masse. Jack Turner was ordered to fly straight into the heart of the operation to confront the Phantom plane head-on. The decisive battle was at hand, but where speed and human will would decide the fate of both nations. December 1944, Europe was in the grip of its harshest winter in years. From the Ardennes, the Germans suddenly launched a massive counterattack to cut off the Allies. The ground was covered in snow, the sky was thick with smoke, and everything was a deadly gray. But in the darkness, something new appeared, something that made the world tremble: the Me-262 jet. For the first time in history, war had seen a weapon that flew faster than the sound of artillery fire. The Me-262s came in, blasting apart B-17 formations before any American pilots could see them. Among the engineers watching the counterattack, Eric Muller, the spiritual father of the Me-262, stood dumbfounded as each jet left the runway. He understood that from this moment on, each plane that took off was also a life that was betting on the fate of Germany. At Debden Base, England, early morning mist. Lieutenant Jack Turner's P-51 Mustang squadron was ordered to escort the bombers attacking the Ardennes region, targeting German fuel depots and airfields. Jack stood in front of the battle map listening to the report. Intelligence confirms that the Luftwaffe has launched new jets. Speed 870 km/h, 30mm weapons. We cannot catch up. We can only ambush them when they slow down to land. The room was dead silent. Jack smiled slightly, his voice lowered. Then we don't chase speed, we chase opportunity. He knew this battle would be unlike any before. December 19th, 1944, more than 400 B-17s cut through the snowy sky. Behind them, P-51s glittered in the winter sun. In the distance, German radar picked up the signal. At Lechfeld Base, Eric stood behind the observation window as Captain Kurt Henschel's Me-262 squadron prepared to take off. "We're going to hit them in the heart. Show the world the might of the German Luftwaffe," Kurt shouted. 4 Me-262s streaked off the runway, leaving trails of white smoke. Their speed was so fast that the air seemed to tear apart. Eric clenched his fists, fear rising in his heart, not for Germany, but for the young pilots themselves. "The machine is perfect, but the people inside it are not ready," he thought to himself. At 8,000 meters, Jack and his squadron suddenly saw silver flashes of light flashing across the formation. "There they are, 2 o'clock east," the radio blared. Before anyone could react, a B-17 exploded, turning into a giant fireball. Me-262s appeared and disappeared like lightning, rushing through the American formation at an incredible speed. Jack pulled hard on the control stick, trying to follow a jet, but the radar showed the speed, 870-kilometer rate, too fast to catch up. He growled, "You can't play with them in speed. Attack them when they turn." His squadron immediately changed tactics, spreading out in an arc. As the Me-262s circled to fire a second volley, Jack suddenly swooped in from below, cutting across the flight path. The two planes passed each other within a few meters of each other. In that brief moment, Jack clearly saw the gleaming silver jet, the black swastika on the wing, and the face of the German pilot inside, his eyes cold but panicked. They both understood. They were looking at the face of the man who could kill them. Jack folded his wings and followed, but the Me-262 accelerated, leaving a trail of white smoke. Just when it seemed like he had lost sight of it, the jet suddenly lurched. The left engine belched black smoke, seemingly malfunctioning. Jack immediately seized the opportunity and rushed forward. The distance narrowed, 600 meters, 400 meters. He pulled the trigger. 12.7mm bullets sprayed out like rain, piercing the jet's fuselage. There was a flash of explosion. The Me-262 burst into flames and crashed to the ground, leaving a long trail of smoke that tore through the gray sky. Jack watched it fall in silence. No joy in his heart, just a strange emptiness. He knew he had just landed his first jet plane, and knew too that inside it was a man like himself, a man who might have a family, ideals, and fears. At the same time, in Lakefeld, Eric received the news. The pilot, Kurt Henschel, died in action. The Me-262 crashed 30 kilometers from Augsburg. He was silent, no words, no tears. He just quietly took off his glasses, put them on the table, and sat down. In his mind appeared the image of the Me-262 shining brightly in the sky, his perfect child, but now a flying grave. I have created something too powerful for humans to control, he thought to himself. Germany did not give up. In the following weeks, dozens of Me-262s continued to take off, but the numbers were low. Fuel was running out. Many pilots had not yet been trained enough, and the machines kept malfunctioning. On the contrary, the US was getting stronger. Jack and his teammates were now not only flying escort flights, but also hunting for jet airports. They flew low, ambushing the Me-262 as it took off or landed, the only time it was slow and vulnerable. In January 1945, during an attack mission, Jack crashed into Lakefeld Airfield, where Eric himself was working. The bomb exploded, the research workshop caught fire. Eric was thrown to the ground, his ears ringing from the explosion. When he looked up, he saw the sky filled with the smoke of Mustangs. On one of those planes, Jack Turner. They did not know each other, but fate had brought those two people to the edge of life and death. May 1945, Berlin fell. Germany surrendered. Eric was taken prisoner, transferred to an American research camp under Operation Paperclip, where German scientists were brought to serve the United States. At a test base in Nevada, he met a young American officer who had been invited to observe the testing of a new jet engine, Jack Turner. The two looked at each other. No hatred, no words, just the silence of two people who had been on opposite sides of the sky. Jack raised his hand and said softly, "Maybe we were both just doing our jobs." Eric smiled faintly. Yes, but maybe that job cost the world too much. The world had changed. The war was over, but its lessons about technology, about ethics, about human limitations still resonated. Eric later became an advisor in the American jet engine program. Jack left the army and started a civilian airline. Both, though never mentioned, carried in their hearts the invisible scar, the scar of the Ardennes sky. 46. World War II had been over for almost a year, but its flames still lingered. Berlin was in ruins. Children roamed the streets picking up crumbs, while American, British, and Soviet soldiers divided up the occupied zones. In the rubble, two men on opposite sides of the sky now stood together under the same fragile sky of peace. Eric Muller, former chief engineer of Messerschmitt, was now imprisoned at an American research camp in New Mexico. Jack Turner, a former P-51 Mustang pilot, was assigned as a flight test consultant for the U.S. Air Force's new jet program. Two men who had known each other only through sights and bullets were now brought together by fate. In the middle of the New Mexico desert, Eric sat in the silver metal house of the Los Alamos test camp. Every morning he looked out into the distance, where the wind blew across the yellow sand like dry waves. Farther away was the jet test range, where the Americans were testing the engine he had built in Germany. An American officer came to him, placing a file on the table with the words Project Jetstream printed on it. "We want you to join this program. Use Me-262 technology to develop an aircraft for the United States Air Force." Eric took the file but remained silent. He knew he had no choice, and deep down, he knew he was helping to build another war machine. A change of flag, but not of substance. In California, Jack Turner returned to the cockpit for the first time in nearly a year. The P-80 Shooting Star, the first generation of American jets, was preparing to take off. Jack put his hand on the control stick, took a deep breath, and turned the switch. The jet engines roared, the sound reminding him of the Ardennes, where the Me-262s had once terrified him. As the P-80 took off, it soared into the blue sky. But amid the howling wind, Jack felt something strange. The feeling of victory was gone. Instead, there was only emptiness. When he landed, he met the technical officer, Eric Muller. At that moment, the two men froze. Not enemies, not friends, just two people caught in the wheel of history. One afternoon, in a room filled with drawings, Jack went to Eric. The red light of the late afternoon shone through the glass windows, illuminating both of their tired faces. Jack began. You know, the day I saw the first Me-262, I thought the Germans were crazy, but now I understand this is the future. Eric smiled, his eyes sad. The future? No, Lieutenant. That is a testament to the stupidity of mankind when we use our intelligence to kill each other faster. Jack was silent, looking outside, where engineers were attaching wings to the new jet model. But if we don't do it, someone else will. Eric replied, his voice hoarse, and that is why war will never end. At that moment, they both understood they were not just soldiers or engineers, but pieces of a giant machine called human ambition. In 1947, the US successfully tested the Bell X-1, surpassing the speed of sound. The Soviet Union responded by developing the MiG-9 and MiG-15 based on data obtained from Germany. The new race had begun, the Cold War. Eric was transferred to work as a consultant on the Jet Supremacy Project, where the US focused on the speed and range of jets. The aerodynamic principles he had studied for Germany were now the foundation of the US Air Force. Once again, he found himself serving the war machine, only this time under a different flag. I have changed sides, but not my role. Still the one who creates the wings for the steel birds to fly to kill. He wrote in his diary, his handwriting scribbled and smeared with grease and cigarette ash. Eric wondered many times, if I hadn't invented the Me-262, how many people would not have died? He looked up at the sky, which had once been his pride, but now every roar of the engine made him feel a pang in his heart. Jack was different. He began training young pilots, teaching them how to control jets. But every time he saw white smoke streaking the sky, he remembered the Ardennes and the burning plane that fell and the face of the German pilot he had seen. I shot him, but he made me understand. No one really wins in war. 1948, the US tested a new generation of long-range jet aircraft, the F-86 Sabre, the pinnacle of technology at the time. Eric was invited to witness the first test flight. Jack was the test pilot. Before takeoff, Jack walked over and shook Eric's hand. I will fly for both of us. Eric nodded, only saying softly, fly high, but don't forget to look down. There are still people down there. The F-86 soared into the sky, cutting through the wind, surpassing the speed of sound to the cheers of hundreds of engineers. But Eric just stood still. In his eyes, that jet was no different from the Me-262 of yesteryear. The same principle, the same aspiration, and the same ghost. In 1950, Eric left the US living in seclusion in Switzerland. He spent the rest of his life writing a book on ethics and science, with the opening sentence, "Human intelligence can fly higher than the sky, but without humanity, it will fall like a burning star." Jack, after leaving the army, started a civil airline called Blue Horizon Air. Blue Horizon. He still flew planes, but now carried people, no longer carried bombs. Every time he took off, he would whisper into the radio, "Have a safe flight, Eric." It was a salute to a friend, an enemy, and the man who had ushered humanity into a new era, albeit at the cost of millions of lives. The war was over, but its legacy was not lost. From the ashes of Nazi Germany, the world entered the jet age, then the nuclear age. Men like Eric and Jack no longer fired guns, but the technology they created paved the way for new confrontations. America and the Soviet Union, East and West, freedom and ideology. And once again, the skies would be filled with the roar of jets. 1950, the world had just emerged from World War II, but was now entering a new confrontation. No longer a war of bombs and bullets, but a war of intelligence, technology, and nuclear fear. The United States and the Soviet Union, the two new superpowers, divided the world by an invisible boundary, the Iron Curtain. The jet engines that had been invented in Germany were now the strategic weapons of both sides. And between that boundary, the legacy of German engineers like Erich Müller began to exert an unexpected power. Washington, spring 1951. In a closed meeting room at the Pentagon, General Curtis LeMay slammed his hand on the table. The Soviets have the MiG-15, which is superior to our F-80. If we don't act now, the skies of Europe will belong to them. On the screen, the image of the MiG-15 soared into the sky. In the lower corner, a small line printed in Russian, technology based on a German jet design from 1944. The room fell silent. The ghost of the Third Reich seemed to haunt the world, only now it wore a different cap, a different flag. LeMay continued, "We need a new jet, faster, higher, something that can keep the skies free." In California, Erich Muller, a German engineer who had been imprisoned, was now officially a technical advisor to North American aviation. He was working on the F-86 Sabre, the American jet that was expected to defeat the MiG-15. Erich was quiet, always wearing thick glasses, but his eyes still shone coldly. He knew that the technology he had created for the German war was now helping America protect the free world, a paradox that even he could not explain. "Science has no boundaries," he once said, "only men set them." In the summer of 1951, the skies over the Korean Peninsula were ablaze. American F-86 Sabres clashed with Soviet MiG-15s in one of the fiercest air battles in history. Both jets, both with German heritage, were tearing up the skies over East Asia. Jack Turner, now a training advisor, watched from Osan Air Base, South Korea. He saw small silver dots collide and separate, white smoke trailing through the clouds. "We're fighting with the technology of our old enemies," Jack whispered. In one battle, a Sabre shot down a MiG over the Yalu River, but the downed pilot was German, a former Luftwaffe mercenary, now an advisor to the Soviet Union. War had turned people from the same hometown and profession into enemies again. In 1953, the United States declared test the X-2 Starbuster, the first jet to reach Mach 2. On the other side, the Soviet Union quietly developed the MiG-19, surpassing the speed of sound in the stratosphere. Every news report, every test made the world hold its breath. Speed became a measure of national power. Erich, now 54 years old, still works hard in the laboratory. He is no longer as excited as before, but seems afraid. He wrote in his diary, "The day we fly faster than sound is also the day human conscience is left behind." Langley, Virginia, CIA headquarters. A map spread out on the table, the entire Soviet border. The US needs reconnaissance images, but conventional aircraft cannot penetrate Russian air defenses. The only solution, the U-2, a high-altitude reconnaissance jet. Who was involved in designing the high-strength wing frame? Erich Muller. The CIA knew his past, but kept him in the dark. "He who served Germany now serves America. That's the price of war," one officer said coldly. When the U-2 first flew, Jack Turner was invited to watch. He watched the thin, wing-like jet soar to 70,000 feet. "We've turned the skies into a spy haven," Jack whispered. May 1960. The U-2, piloted by Gary Powers, was shot down by a Soviet missile while conducting reconnaissance over Sverdlovsk. The world was shocked. Moscow condemned Washington. President Eisenhower was forced to appear before the media. The US-Soviet summit broke down. The Cold War sky was in turmoil again. Erich, upon hearing the news of the U-2 crash, said only one sentence: "Any bird that flies too high will eventually burn." Jack, hearing the news, came to see him for the last time. The two sat in the silent factory with only the sound of fans and clocks ticking. "Jack, have you ever thought, if we didn't continue to invent, the world would be more peaceful?" Erich: "No, Jack. If we don't do it, someone else will, and the world will still burn, only we won't be there to see it." After the U-2 incident, the United States stepped up its space program. The V-2 rocket, developed by Germany, became the foundation for NASA. Once again, the technology of war was used to reach space. Erich saw the image of a Saturn rocket launching from Cape Canaveral, carrying American astronauts. He shed tears. At last, the wings of war can fly for peace. But he knew that was only a small part of the truth. Most of the space budget was still used for military purposes. The older Erich got, the more clearly he saw the paradox. What he had created to help humanity understand the sky had become a tool for spying and killing. He wrote in his diary, "Every invention is a double-edged sword. The problem lies not in the steel, but in the hands that hold it." Jack, now retired, runs a civilian flight school. He still tells his students about the early days of jets, about lessons not found in books. "The war taught me that the bravest man is not the one who shoots fast, but the one who stops at the right moment." 61. The Berlin Wall was built, dividing Germany in two, and the memories of two people who once stood under the same sky. Erich returns to Germany for the first time in 15 years. He stands by the cold wall, his hand on the gray cement. "I was born in war, lived in war, and now I die in a false peace." Before leaving, he looked up into the sky, where two jets, one American, one Soviet, flew side by side, then parted ways. Between them was a void, a place where peace had never truly existed. From the battlefields of Europe to the skies of Korea, from German laboratories to the Nevada desert, technology is no longer a tool, but a force shaping the world. But no matter how high we fly, humans are still unable to escape their own shadow. The early 1960s, the world seemed to be at peace under the rule of two superpowers, but behind every news of peace, thousands of secret operations were taking place every day. In the air, at sea, and in conference rooms lit up all night. Now, war no longer needed to be declared. It was fought silently, through coded telegrams, secret meetings, and people who did not exist in official records. In that darkness, two names that once belonged to history, Erich Muller, a German engineer, and Jack Turner, a former American pilot, were drawn into a new vortex. Zurich, 1962. On a cold, rainy night, Erich sat in a small cafe by the lake. He had not been in contact with anyone from America for many years, but today, a strange man appeared, wearing a leather jacket, speaking with a clear American accent. Mr. Muller, this is Agent James Conrad of the Central Intelligence Agency. I need to speak to you about an urgent matter. Erich looked up, silent. He was used to this kind of person, people who never came just to talk. We have discovered that the Soviets are rehiring former German engineers. Some of them worked with you. Erich frowned. And what do you want me to do? Help us find them before they transfer their new jet design to the Russians. Erich did not answer immediately. Images of his old friends flashed through his mind. Men who had believed that science could save humanity, only to be turned into instruments of murder. In Washington, Jack Turner was living peacefully on his farm outside Virginia. One morning, he received a letter with the CIA seal. We need you for a special assignment. It concerns a German engineer who worked with you, Erich Muller. Jack read it over and over again. For the first time in years, he felt his heart pounding as it had in the battlefield. I thought we were far from war, he said softly. No, Turner, the officer replied. War has only changed its form. A week later, Jack arrived in Zurich. At the Bellevue Hotel, the CIA set up a temporary base. The mission, to monitor a group of former German engineers suspected of having links to the KGB, the Soviet intelligence agency. Erich was assigned as a technical liaison, and Jack was in charge of security. The two men met again after nearly 10 years. At that moment, neither said anything. A handshake, silent, filled with things that could not be said. Jack, I didn't think I'd see you here, in a war without uniforms. Erich, and I didn't think war was about suits and briefcases. The mission seemed simple: follow the engineers, prevent them from leaving for the Soviet side. But on the third night, everything fell apart. A German engineer named Weissman, who had worked under Erich, disappeared from the hotel. The next morning, Swiss police found his car by the lake, but no body. In the trunk were technical documents bearing the logo of the Jetstream project, a program Erich had participated in the US. The CIA panicked. Erich became the prime suspect, the one who might have leaked top secret information. Jack was ordered to monitor his own friend, but he didn't believe Erich was a spy. He wasn't the kind of guy who sold his soul. Jack told Conrad, Turner, in this business, everyone has a price, Conrad replied, and the smartest are the most dangerous. Jack decided to investigate on his own. He followed Erich for days, from the small cafe in Zurich to the machine shop where he was assembling experimental jet wings. But instead of betrayal, he saw only a lonely old man living with a heavy past. One night, Jack sneaked into Erich's apartment. On the table, among dozens of drawings, was a piece of paper with the trembling words, I just want the bird to fly for peace. Jack was speechless. He understood that this friend was not betraying him. He was just trying to make amends for his mistake. The next day, Erich was arrested. The CIA claimed that he had contacted a KGB agent through an intermediary, but Jack, while examining the documents, discovered that James Conrad, the agent who had recruited Erich, had disappeared, and the trail led to a secret bank account in Vienna containing thousands of dollars transferred from Moscow. Conrad was a traitor. Jack rushed to the Zurich airport where Conrad was preparing to fly to Austria. In the middle of the rainy night, the sound of an American reconnaissance plane's jet engine echoed in the sky. Jack pulled out his gun and stopped him. "Conrad, are you trying to take the war to the other side?" Conrad sneered. "War has no sides, Turner. There are only those who know how to exploit it." A shot rang out. Conrad fell to the ground, his files scattered in the rain. In it was a list of dozens of German engineers being fought over by both sides. After the incident, the CIA was forced to release Eric, but his reputation was badly damaged. The media never mentioned his name, as if he had never existed. Jack went to see him for the last time, in a small house on Lake Geneva. Eric was sitting quietly, watching the jet fly across the gray sky. Jack: "Do you regret it, Eric?" Eric: "Regret having created things that make the world afraid, but without them, we would still be fighting with spears." They were both silent for a long time. Eric continued: "War has only changed its form. It is still here, in the head of every man, where no one wins." At the end of 1963, Eric died suddenly of a heart attack. In his room, people found an old notebook in which they wrote, "I created wings for war, but what I dream of is wings for peace." Jack, upon hearing the news, was stunned. He held a small memorial service. No flags, no ceremony, just a picture of Eric and a drawing of the Me-262 on the table. He was neither a criminal nor a hero. He was a testament to the price that humanity pays when it uses its intelligence to kill each other. When Eric Muller died, the world entered a new era, the era of supersonic jets, nuclear missiles, and electronic espionage. But at the same time, humanity was moving further away from the concept of true peace. The sky, once a place of freedom, had become an invisible battlefield, a place where only soulless jets remained. Summer 1960. The wind over Berlin carried the heat of newly built concrete buildings. The city still bore the scars of war, its charred walls interspersed with new glass buildings, symbols of a Europe resurrected in the chill of the Cold War. Jack Turner, now in his 40s, had gray hair. He was no longer a fighter pilot, but an advisor to the United States Air Force, training the next generation of jet pilots. The F-104s, the F-4 Phantoms, supersonic monsters he had only dreamed of during the war, were right in front of him, but every time the jet engines roared, Jack felt his heart ache. It was no longer the sound of victory, it was the echo of memories, the screams of those who would never return. One morning, Jack received a letter from Germany, from Eric Muller. "Jack, I live in Munich. I heard you're in Berlin. If possible, I'd like to see you one last time." Jack held the letter for a long time. Many years had passed, but the name still made his heart heavy. The engineer who had built the iron monsters that had killed so many of his friends now wanted to meet. But deep down, Jack knew that this meeting was not about reproach, but about closing an era. One autumn afternoon, in a small cafe near Lake Starnberg, two men sat across from each other. No more uniforms, no more insignia, just two people who had gone through the nightmare of history. Eric: "You know, Jack, I used to believe that if we made planes faster, more powerful, the war would end faster." Jack: "But it only made people die faster." Eric: "Yes, and I realized technology cannot save humanity if people do not change." They sat in silence. Outside, the roar of jet engines from a nearby airbase echoed. Eric looked out the window, his eyes pensive. Those engine sounds sounded like the breathing of the world we have created, a world that is strong, but lonely. Jack nodded. "I used to think that strength was being able to destroy the enemy, but now I understand. True strength is being able to forgive yourself." They both looked at each other, then smiled. A faint smile between two battle lines that had vanished. A few years later, Eric passed away quietly in his small apartment in Munich. There was no large funeral, only a few former colleagues came to see him off. In his will, he left all his research manuscripts and personal notes to the German Aviation Museum, along with a single line: "Machines can fly higher than the sky, but only humans can overcome the darkness in their hearts." When Jack heard the news, he quietly went to Germany and placed a small flower on Erico's grave. He whispered, "You flew too far, my friend, but in the end, we all landed in peace." In the years that followed, the world continued to rush forward. Supersonic aircraft, nuclear bombs, spaceships, all bear the mark of people like Eric and Jack. But hidden deep within each of those machines, there is a question that has never been answered. Will the power that humans create ever make them truly free? In his twilight years, Jack wrote a memoir. Book title: The Sky Remembered. The Sky Remembered Forever. In it, he doesn't talk about victory. He doesn't talk about bombs. He only talks about people, faces, choices, regrets. The book ends with a simple line. War teaches us to fly, but only peace teaches us to be human. Spring 1972. Over the skies of Germany, West German F-104 jets are tearing through the air in training. They are the result of an unlikely alliance between American technology and German engineering, between past and present. On the fuselage, the NATO logo glows in the sunlight. At the end of the runway, a silver-haired man stands silently watching. Jack Turner. It has been many years since he left the military, but his heart is still in the sky. He has been invited to attend the handover ceremony of the new squadron as a witness of the old generation. But for Jack, today is more than just a ceremony. It is the day he comes to see the legacy of Eric Muller, a friend, a rival, a man who helped shape the world of modern flying. The young pilot greets Jack, his eyes shining as brightly as his own. Mr. Turner, it's an honor to meet someone who flew Mustangs in World War II. We've learned a lot from your generation. Jack smiled. And I learned that victory means nothing if you forget why you took off. The F-104 roared. The sound was powerful, cold. Unlike the old piston engine whine, Jack closed his eyes. In his mind's eye, the sky of 1944 appeared. The lights, the black smoke, and Eric's eyes hidden behind the ME-262 cockpit glass. We created hell and then learned to live in it, Jack said to himself. A gust of wind blew, carrying the sound of jet engines fading into the horizon. He knew the world would continue to fly, faster, farther. But as Eric had said, the higher you fly, the more you have to learn to keep yourself from falling. In Jack's suitcase was an old envelope, yellowed with age. Eric's last letter, perhaps never sent. Jack, if one day you see our machines flying in peace, remember that it did not come from strength, but from the pain we both carry. I believe the sky has memories, and it will remember those who tried to turn war into a lesson. Eric. Jack reread each line, then folded the letter carefully. He looked up at the clear blue sky. No more bombs, no more smoke, just silence. The most beautiful sound ever created by man. The ceremony ended. Jack left the runway, walked along the thin snow-covered trees. He stopped, looked up at the long white smoke trails of the F-104s flying in a V formation. It is a symbol of strength, a young officer said. Jack smiled. No, it is a symbol of memory. Every streak of smoke in the sky is a story that we must never forget. As the sun set behind the Alps, the sky was dyed red like the flag of the past. But this time, it was no longer the color of war. It was the color of peace, something they had paid for with a generation. Jack turned and walked away, leaving behind the fiery sky, where he had lived, fought, and lost. He knew that when he was gone, these stories would only remain in books, in movies, and in the memories of those interested in history. But he also knew that as long as there were people to tell them, the war would never be forgotten. Many years later, in the Berlin Air Museum, they displayed a restored Me-262 and a faded P-51 Mustang. Between the two planes is a small plaque engraved with the words, "They shot at each other, but they taught the world to fly higher." Below are two names, Eric Muller, 1914-1957, Jack Turner, 1918 and 1981. Not heroes, not enemies, just two men who lived their lives for the sky. As the world entered the era of satellites and space shuttles, people still talked about those years. The era when every invention was exchanged for blood. There is no longer a battlefield, but in every design, every technology. The question that Eric left behind still echoes. What do we fly for? For victory or for the hope of survival? Air battles, life and death confrontations, and people who dare to push their own limits. That is the true history of the sky. If you love stories about war, technology, and decisions that shape the world, subscribe to the channel today so you don't miss any journey in the world of war and great history.